Hello, everybody. Ich heiße Tim. That's where my German ends, I'm afraid. So I'm from the UK. Today I'm going to speak to you about a pilot hemp project that I'm involved with and the various issues and the problems involved with this project. My background is in journalism, events management, and PR. So when I'm talking about PR, I'm talking about public relations. Now, frequently, sorry, my technical support. Now, frequently, when people talk about PR, when we're talking about companies, it tends to be lumped in with marketing and PR. So the PR I'm talking today is what I call old-fashioned PR. It's about going out there and speaking to people, having face-to-face conversations, because you can only do so much digitally. Actually, to get to the heart of the matter, you need to have these conversations. So this is my background, and I guess I'm not here. I don't pretend to be an expert in growing hemp, but I do have some sort of expertise in people, in having these conversations. And most of you in this room today, I would say, are probably the converted. I'm speaking to the converted. You know what hemp is, you know that it's a good thing, you know that it has lots of potential, which is great. But for any movement to grow, you need to have a conversation with the unconverted. Those people outside of this bubble, the cannabis bubble, however lovely it is. So every time I go into a new cannabis situation, there are unique variables. And I have PR clients inside the cannabis industry and outside. As a result, I get to see kind of a broad picture. I get to see the picture from both sides. So I first got involved with the medical cannabis bike tour. Is anybody familiar with the medical cannabis bike tour? No? Thank you. Thank you for the shake of the head. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Medical Cannabis Bike Tour. This is a charity. Every year, the bike tour rides in a different part of Europe, 3 days, 420 kilometers, and it raises money for cancer research, specifically to test the research of a team of scientists in Madrid who are using cannabis to treat brain cancer patients. So, as you can see, everybody has a matching yellow jersey. And in the early days, one of the first obstacles we found trying to sell this to the unconverted was the stigma. Yes, it's a charity, but it's got cannabis in it. And so early on, we had to look for a way to overcome this stigma. And we did this by focusing on the sport. If you're not familiar with cannabis, if you're not familiar with its potential, you will have a certain assumption. You will perhaps think that the average cannabis user is a lazy stoner who's going to be sitting at home, surfing on the couch. So on the bike tour, we have participants from around the world, and you have all these guys dressed in the same uniforms, cycling. Some are very good cyclists along the roads. And when people first see the bikes go by, they have a look, they see the yellow jerseys, and they think, wow, this is an impressive sportive event. It's only when they look closer that they see the word cannabis. And I have seen it many times. I've seen people look at this and their expressions change. Suddenly, it's become something different. Cannabis, sport, how does that work? So this taught me a very important lesson early on, that actually to change people's minds about cannabis, yes, it's about education, but sometimes you have to simply flip the image. So one of my clients outside of the cannabis industry is a guy called Hector. He lives in the southwest of England, in the county of Devon, and he is an aristocrat. He's got a history of being an activist. So he was against the Iraq War. He's also campaigned against genetically modified crops. In the past 2 years, he's retired from activism, and he's now focusing on promoting organic farming. And this is where he lives, a lovely country house, big country house, and it's surrounded by a farm. He shows his eco-credentials. There's a straw bale house, solar farm, and he has one of the oldest permaculture gardens in the UK. So, Tapley Park sits in the middle of a large country estate. We are talking 2,600 hectares. Just to put it into context, 1 hectare is the size of 1 football field. Okay? It's important to be able to visualize. So we're talking about a lot of agricultural land, and on this land there are 22 tenant farms. These are traditional farmers. They grow various crops, wheat, barley, rapeseed, and they also keep cows. So last year, Hector came to me and he said, I want to grow hemp on the estate. Okay? This is the background to Hector and Tapley Park. I want to grow hemp on the estate. And I said, that's great. How are we going to do that? And he said, I've got a 3-hectare field, and we'll grow it on that. And so I said, OK, that's great. I went away to research it. Very quickly, I discovered that it just wasn't practical to grow on a 3-hectare field, for various reasons which I'm going to describe in a minute. But essentially, the figure that we need to make it cost-effective is 20 hectares. And this informed us to use a new strategy and to talk to some of these farmers and to try and persuade them to grow hemp on the estate. So just a bit of background about farming in the UK. Main crops, cereals, vegetables. So just from these facts, there's 2 that I'd like to pick out. Number 1, the average age of a UK farmer is 59. Okay, that's significant. We'll come back to that. The other thing I would like to say is approximately 6 million hectares are used to grow crops in the UK. That's a lot of hectares. Let's have a look at cannabis and hemp in the UK. So remember I said 1 hectare, the size of a football field. So remember, 6 million hectares of crops being grown in the UK. Of those, 350 hectares are being used to grow hemp. It's tiny. And I go to a lot of these expos and I hear, yes, hemp is the future, hemp is potential, everybody's growing it. Not in the UK, they're not. And this started off the conversation. I have to get my head around why nobody is growing hemp in the UK. So just to give you a little bit of background, recreational cannabis use is prohibited in the UK. Hemp was prohibited for a long time. It wasn't always the case, though. This guy is Henry VIII. In the 16th century, it was actually illegal not to grow hemp if you had land in England. Hemp was so essential for the Navy. It made the ropes, it made the sails, it made the nets. So, the UK is very underdeveloped when it comes to cannabis and hemp. This is the background that I'm going into. When I go out and have these conversations with the farmers, when I'm trying to persuade them to grow hemp, this is the background that we're up against. Okay, and I think this is, again, this is the important thing to think. When people are looking at the macro picture, they're looking at hemp around the world, hemp production going up. Actually, often we forget the micro picture, the people who are actually going to grow it. You know, what's going to happen? Some magical hemp master farmer is going to come and convert all our fields to hemp. No, it's going to be the small farmers that are going to be persuaded to grow hemp as a cash crop. Okay, so just to give you an illustration, I'm going out, I'm speaking to the farmers, yeah? So this is an illustration. It's a tale of two farmers. On the left, we have a guy called Rupert. On the right, we have a guy called Pete. Okay? Young farmer, old farmer. Remember that? 59 years old is the average farmer. So Rupert, he's in his 40s. He has a 20-year-old son who he hopes is going to take over the farm. He has a mother who has arthritis. She takes CBD for her arthritis. Actually, you can buy CBD throughout the UK, just as you can in Austria, I believe. So he is familiar with cannabis in CBD form. He's also open to new ideas. So he's actually looked at different crops. He's looked at growing soybeans in the UK, not practical. He's looked at growing hemp, and it's attractive to him, but there are practicalities which stop him from growing hemp. So he's open-minded. When I'm having a conversation with him, yeah, he's quite willing to grow hemp. This guy, on the other hand, his neighbor, Pete, he's in his mid-60s. He's conservative by nature. He's lived on the same farm all his life. If I mention cannabis to this guy, his response will be that all drug dealers must be shot. He told me he likes Trump, Donald Trump. He wishes we had a Donald Trump in the UK. So many people would say, yeah, I'll talk to this guy. He can go, yeah, screw him. He's never going to grow hemp. This guy might grow hemp. He's never going to grow hemp. But the thing about public relations, the thing about PR, is these guys are neighbors. And actually, it's as important to have the conversation with this guy as it is with this guy. Because if he is going to grow it, if Rupert's going to grow hemp, his neighbor needs to be comfortable with it. If this guy's got a field of hemp and he thinks he's growing weed next door, what's he going to do? He's going to create all sorts of problems. And so this is what I do. I have to go out and I have to speak to Pete. I have to listen to him. I have to make sure he's comfortable, has the information to be comfortable with hemp. Okay? And in the early days when I started doing this, I mean, how do you go to a farmer like him and have this conversation? So I decided in the early days to come up with an icebreaker to tell a joke. It's a very bad joke, and I've told it many times. It doesn't get any funnier. So I say to him, oh, Hector Christie has asked me to research growing hemp. At this point, I can see this guy's eyes. I can see by his expression what he's thinking. So I say, I know what you're thinking. And then I say, what has he been smoking? At this point, we all laugh. The elephant leaves the room, and we can have some kind of serious conversation about hemp. So, PR conversations, it's very important to speak the right language. Speak the same language as those farmers. You know, I'm not a farmer, but I live in the country. Sometimes I play the idiot. I have to play the idiot. If I pretend to know what I'm talking about, these guys will tell me. So the conversations I have basically revolve around three questions. Why should I grow it? Will it make me money? And what are the practicalities, the logistics, and the obstacles? So firstly, why should I grow hemp? So I can give the farmer some facts. I've done my research. I can give him some good facts to make him think. So it's a great rotation crop. Follow-on crops can yield 20% more. There's a study from Kentucky that says they grew hemp on the same field for 14 years. And every year, there was no depletion in soil quality, and there was no depletion in yield. So for a farmer, that makes his ears open. It's also economical, requires virtually no pesticide applications. And this is the thing, you go out and talk to farmers. As consumers, we go, yes, organic is good. Putting pesticides on is bad. You know, they should be growing organic. This is what they should be going. If anybody here has a garden, I have a garden, I grow organic. Yes, it tastes wonderful, but it's damn hard work. And luckily, it's only me eating it. If I was growing for a market, I would be screwed. And this is what they tell me. We don't like using pesticides. They're expensive. So hemp is attractive for that reason. It's a cheap crop. The third question is potential new markets. And this is the thing. When I first started going out and having these conversations, again, we all know hemp has such potential. There are thousands of products out there that could be used with hemp. But if I say to a farmer, oh yeah, grow hemp because you can make a car with it, he's just going to think I'm crazy. So what I focused on was something that was very simple, something that these guys could focus on. And I came up with hemp milk. Why did I come up with hemp milk? Because every farmer can walk into their local supermarket and they can find hemp milk on the shelf. It's normal. Now, the other thing is that a lot of these farmers, they have cows. They're dairy farmers. And so they are aware that demand for milk is going down and demand for plant-based milk is going up. I think in the UK, about 30%. We've seen a 30% rise in plant-based milk. So these are conversations that are being had with the farming community. So again, there's some sort of connection there. And this is something I learned very early on, talking to these farmers. If I have a conversation with one farmer, it will get repeated. It's a very closed network. And these conversations get repeated. So that's the first question. In fact, it's not the first question a farmer will ask me. Normally it is, how can I make money? At the end of the day, every farmer is interested in making money. So if you're familiar with hemp, there's several ways. You can use grain, fiber, dual purpose, and increasingly for CBD. But this can be very confusing. You start talking about end products. It's like I said before, it's too much information for them. So one of the best bits of advice I had early on in this process is a specialist hemp grower told me, look, before you start growing anything, you need to find your end product and work your way backwards. And it was the best advice that I had. Okay, and then having a conversation with the farmers, I realized that actually this is the language that they speak. No farmer is going to commit the crops to his fields without an end market. But one thing I did discover in this conversation, because hemp is not used, because it's not so popular, they are not going to go out and look for this end product, the end market. That is something, as a PR, as researching this project, that I am going to have to do. I'm going to have to go out and find the end use. So logistics and obstacles. You need a government license to grow hemp. It's quite straightforward. It's got easier over the years, but there's still a little work to do. Growing. So what are you growing it for? And remember the young farmer, Rupert? I had a conversation with him, and he said, look, I've looked into hemp, but the problem I have is because of the latitude of the UK, where we are in the UK, hemp will harvest in October. That's too late in the season for me. Already winter's on, we get a lot of rain in this part of the country, it's just not good. So I had the information to be able to say, well, look, actually there are varieties out there, such as Finola, which is a Finnish strain, that will crop early. It can crop in August, and this suddenly makes hemp far more attractive. So one of the big issues for the farmers is harvesting. Anybody who is familiar with hemp will tell you it is a nightmare because the fiber is so tough, it will wrap itself around components, it will break machinery. And so I had several farmers say, yes, I'm interested in growing it, but I am not going to harvest it. And again, this is where I have to come in. I have to find custom specialists to come in and harvest it because they don't have the machinery to do this. But perhaps the biggest obstacle, and I think really anybody looking to get into hemp needs to be aware of this, is the lack of infrastructure. For hemp to become a mainstream crop, the infrastructure needs to rise. And this is why the 3-hectare field just wasn't cost effective. The nearest processing plant to where we are is 500 kilometers away. And that 500 kilometers means by the time we take that crop, take it the 500 kilometers, we've lost all the money that we're going to make. So in repeated conversations with hemp specialists, this figure of 20 hectares comes up. You know, this is what's going to make it cost effective. If we can get 20 hectares, then we have enough tonnage to take it, to process it, to take out the fiber and the shiv, which can be used for building materials or animal bedding. And again, this is something that I am going to have to organize. If we cannot get enough farmers to join in and get this magic 20-hectare number, then I think we're going to have to probably harvest for seed and use the stalks for biomass. So these are genuine logistics and obstacles that, in order for a mainstream, for hemp to become a mainstream crop, they need to be overcome. So to conclude, communicating with farmers, you need to have the right conversation. The worst thing you can ever do with a farmer is preach. If you really want to piss off a farmer, you tell him to grow hemp to save the planet. That's not a conversation you want to have. Provide the necessary information. Like I said, I'm not a farmer, but as a former journalist, I'm very good at finding information, talking to people, talking to the experts. And it's about taking that information and simplifying it. It's the same with everything with this new emerging cannabis industry. There's a lot of information out there. Some of it's confusing. Well, in fact, a lot of it's confusing. And you have to strip it down to simple information. Again, we need to help find the partners. So you need to, the farmer's going to grow the hemp, but what happens next? You need to find the partners in the supply chain. And the other thing, again, a public relations lesson that I learned early in my career is a lot of people talk. So we talk. All the time, I speak to people, all they do is talk at me. Sometimes we forget to listen. And it's very important to listen, to respect opinions, not to try and argue with them, but just accommodate those opinions. And ask advice. If you want anybody to help you, ask advice. If they feel like they're giving something to you, they're going to give you something more. And that, my friends, is the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please do go ahead and ask. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah. So my main question, because I found this to be extremely interesting, converting an Austrian farmer might take a lot of, how should I say, PR help.
Yeah.
My question is, when you were convincing a local farmer, you mentioned the fact that he's not willing to take risk without the kind of putting the final product or let's say the end goal in front of his eyes to convince him to make that step. Could you go a little bit deeper into how that precise conversation would go? I mean, with the hemp milk, for example, I doubt you're arriving there with a carton of milk. You probably have some middleman in your back that is, or some prices. That's what would be really interesting for me.
Okay. So it's funny you say that, because I did actually, when I decided to do the hemp milk, yeah, I did go out to see the farmer, and I thought, shit, I should have bought some milk. So I think that's a good idea. But you have to understand, this is very, I mean, when we started it, when I was asked to research, I thought it would be a lot easier. And so this is why we were hoping to start growing it this year. But in fact, there were so many obstacles that actually we delayed till next year. And I'm still in that stage, really, because unless I can get enough farmers to contribute to that magic 20 hectares, it's only then that I can work out what the processing is and what the end product is. So right now, it really is a conversation. It's about finding out who's interested in growing it, will they be willing to grow it. So I've got about 3 farmers who say, yeah, we'd be interested. And once I've had all those conversations and can work out how much acreage this is going to give us, that's the next step. So I'm sorry I can't answer.
No, I'm perfectly understandable. If I can have one follow-up question.
Yeah.
You talked about 20 hectares being that the kind of area that you need for the whole thing to be economical.
Yep.
Why?
Okay, so again, you have to think this is specifically UK. So you're in a great position, and you're in the middle of Europe. So you probably have access to processing plants. I know there's a lot in Czech Republic or Hungary. There's an established hemp industry. It's so new that basically there's only a couple of processing plants. It costs about 300,000 to 400,000 euros to set up a processing plant. And without that investment, you are reliant on transporting it, shipping it.
So what you're saying is the processing plants would only accept produce of a certain level, volume level?
No, it's purely in the transport. Because by the time you've harvested it, taken it up there, paid for that, that's where your profit goes, and then shipped it on.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much.